This is part 2. Please watch part 1 first. It sets up everything you're about to see. Veya lifts her chin. I don't plan to. Sable swallows. By witness, he says, voice steadier than his hands. Guardianship is recorded under the old clause, with conversion possible upon the Omega's consent, as defined and accepted by the Crown. His pen scratches, desperate and holy. Name, Veya Thorn. Terms as stated. Protection clause as spoken. Doctrine of rooms appended. He glances at Veya, then Lucien, then the room. Signed? Lucien signs first, because the world will insist that his name makes the lines real. The ink dries fast. Sable has sand ready, as if he knew the day would come. He would need to shake it like a man blessing bread. He offers the quill to Veya. Her hand is steady. She signs. The room moves, not all at once, like a tide that has been pretending it wasn't a tide. People rise, speak, leave, arrive. Servants collect the salt with careful hands. The counterfeit coin sulks in the bowl like a storm trapped in a teacup, and as the hall empties, someone covers it with a cloth the color of sky right before rain, because sometimes symbols help people keep breathing. Come, Lucien says softly, when the noise has thinned enough for hearing to feel like a gift again. You haven't seen your door. My door, Veya echoes, and lets the words put skin on a thing she has refused to imagine, because imagining is a luxury when surviving is a job. He leads her out by a corridor that does not show itself to people who came to the palace to be impressed. This hall is honest. Stone that sweats in summer, scuffed wainscoting, the ghost of laughter from when someone carried a bucket and slipped and cost a noblewoman 3 hours of patience. The door at the end is plain, good wood, banded iron. Lucien sets his palm against it and looks to her before he pushes. She nods. A small room, clean, tall enough to let the mind stand up. A bed that doesn't pretend to be a cloud. A table. A window with a view of Rosemary arguing with time. A shelf nailed slightly crooked by someone who knew the hammer better than the level. A second door, internal, with a lock that can be turned from this side. Veya steps in. Her body searches for the wrongness out of habit. Draft under the sill. The bed too soft, so falling feels inevitable. A bolt on the outside. A mirror too large so the person who pays your wages can study you without meeting your eyes. The wrongness does not present itself. The room smells like new soap and old stone and, faintly, cinnamon. Someone baked, and the smell refuses to stay put. Lucien remains at the threshold. I can have Sable collapse from happiness by ordering the contract duplicated 100 times in case the first 99 burn, he says. But if you would prefer a person at your door instead of paper, say it. Veya turns the inner lock. The click is simple, domestic, world-changing. She opens it again. Paper is fine, she says. People need to sleep. Some of us, Lucien says, and the part of his mouth that scars choose for truth twitches. Rest. Food will come that you can decline without making anyone cry. Bread, Veya says automatically. Bread, he echoes, and leaves without looking back, because trust is a muscle, and he would like to know if it can be strengthened here. She stands in the center of the small room and lets alone be a thing that happens without fear now. She breathes. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th breath, someone knocks. Not the door to the hall, the inner one, to the narrow passage where maids move at dawn, and secrets survive by pretending to be laundry. The knock is peculiar. 2, pause, 1, 2, the rhythm people use when they are sure they are expected and equally sure they should not be. Veya does not move closer. Who? She asks. A woman's voice, low, hurried. You don't know me. I work the scullery. Don't open, don't speak, just listen. Veya listens because a scullery woman's voice is a thing she has never been wise to ignore. They put the bowl away, the voice says, the counterfeit, but the black is moving under the cloth. Slower, meaner, like pitch. It is looking for a seam. The voice drops, and beneath the fear, Veya hears anger like an ember that has decided to live. It is looking for you. Me, Veya says, careful to keep the word flat and heavy as a stone. It can smell a consent that embarrassed men who liked the old stories, the voice says. It doesn't like you made a new one. They're saying, the ones who whisper, that if it touches your skin, it binds your consent to something you didn't say. A claim without your door. The woman swallows. Men who never cared about our doors want to use yours as a key. Veya does not open the door. She does not panic. Her wrist burns in a steady, stubborn way that feels less like fear and more like a reminder. Every room. Thank you, she says. What's your name? A pause. Dera. Dera, Veya says. If the bowl moves, tell someone you trust whose mouth isn't for show. The harbor woman with beads, or the woman in dark wool who doesn't flinch. A sound like a surprised laugh. Miren, saints keep me. Or him, Veya says, and does not need to say Lucien because names do not always need to be spoken to be believed. If you can get near him. I can get near anyone, Dera says, offended on behalf of the scullery, and disappears into the hum of passages only the palace remembers. Veya sits on the bed and doesn't pretend she will nap. She looks at her hands. They tremble because bodies tremble after they have survived. She holds them still without shaming them for shaking. The door to the hall knocks. 2 taps, proper, patient. She opens it. Miren stands there with her dark wool and her strip of leather, a basket on her arm like any ant come to scold and feed. Up close, the lines around her mouth are not severity. They are the math you learn from tallying how many girls the law failed before the law changed its mind. Eat, Miren says, and produces bread and a tin of salt and a knife softened by 100 sharpenings. And while you chew, listen. The counterfeit was not Greencrest. I didn't think so, Veya says. Your men stand too square to like tricks. Flatterer, Miren says dryly. No, this smells of the Guild of Contracts. Clerks? Veya is genuinely shocked in a way she has not been since she learned how to peel onions without crying. Papermen? Men who like paper because it makes a wall they can hide behind, Miren corrects. They are not all small. Some are very tall indeed. They've been skimming power for years. The old clause. No one remembered it because they never wanted it to be used correctly. Veya tears bread and lets hunger pay attention to the conversation, so fear doesn't hog all the room. They'll try again. Miren nods. They'll try in a place where salt is considered superstitious and water is called symbolism instead of test. She sets the knife down, handle toward Veya, because respect and danger share a table in this woman's world. They'll try at your door, because you embarrassed them in a hall built to make men comfortable. I made a room, Veya says, softer. That's all. You made a door, Miren says. They hate doors they didn't install. She looks toward the window, where Rosemary tries to strangle time out of love and habit. The king will pretend he isn't tired. He is. He will pretend he doesn't like you for more than your mouth. He does. She turns back. He will hold, but he is one body. You are yours. Veya chews, swallows. Every room, she says. Every room, Miren agrees, and leaves because some women do not linger to be thanked. They prefer the work to be the thanks. Evening leans toward the window without getting there yet when the palace changes its sound. Bells again, closer. Footsteps that are not running but are not strolling either. Voices, low, urgent, thread the corridor like string through the eye of a needle. The captain arrives without knocking, which means he is worried enough to forget a door can be insulted. Forgive me, he says, and looks to the latch to remind himself how to be human. Majesty asks, he corrects, requests your presence. Now. Veya stands. What happened? The bowl, he says, and his eyes do a thing soldiers' eyes do when they have seen a kind of weapon they weren't taught the name of. It moved. They reach the hall at a near run. The salt ring is scuffed, a line broken by a careless boot or a deliberate toe. The cloth over the bowl is wet with something that isn't water, a darkness that doesn't reflect the torchlight so much as eat it. Sable is white and furious, jabbing the air with his pen like it can stab. Miren is already on her knees, sleeves shoved up, rebuilding the ring with hands that do not waste salt on drama. Lucien stands on the river again, half a pace outside the sigil. He looks at Veya, and shame flickers across his face. Not shame for anything he did, but the kind that arrives when the world touches what you promised it would not. It wants you, he says simply. Then it can starve, Veya says. We need more than salt, Miren grits. We need witness with teeth. Teeth, the harbor woman says, and dumps another handful of beads that probably cost less than the fate they defy. Teeth, says Sable suddenly, surprising himself. He rips a page from one of his books. Ink can bite. He shoves the paper into the ring and the black curls away, not out of fear, but distaste. Not enough. Truth, Lucien says, and steps forward as if into rain. You said it breaks it. What truth does it want? Miren looks up, eyes narrow. It wants the truth about what you're buying when you say you buy labor. Silence, old and big, enters the hall like a respected aunt who doesn't attend often. Lucien's jaw works. He has been careful all day, wielding gentleness like a weapon he refuses to sheathe. He drops it now. Not the gentleness, the performance. Then listen, he says, to the black in the bowl, to the law, to the city that has been making rooms for itself while men wrote their names on doors. I am not buying her. I am buying a chance to fail at protecting her under terms she can fire me for. I am buying time so she can choose where to set the next door. I am buying paper. I hope she tears up in my face one day because she found something better. I am not buying her. The black in the bowl flattens, not gone. Listening. He keeps going because truth grows like bread when you keep kneading. And if the old law insists on pretending a coin can make a collar, then hear me. I refuse claim without her word. I refuse a bond that costs her door. I refuse the kind of protection that turns a woman into a room I own. He lifts his head. You hear me? For a beat, that could be a lifetime. Nothing moves. The cloth over the bowl sags. The black withdraws a fraction. The salt brightens like frost catching morning. Good, Miren says softly. Reverent not of him, but of the fact that a room just now learned a sentence it didn't he know it could say. Again, he opens his mouth. A shout cracks the corridor. Boots. The breathless panic of a man who has run while bleeding and discovered he can still speak. A guard stumbles into the hall, shoulders slick with red. South wall, he gasps. Gate 2, they're inside. Who? The captain barks, even as his body already knows it doesn't matter who. Moving matters. The guild, the guard wheezes. Clerks, with swords. He laughs, a terrible sound. They brought ink. The bowl hums, pleased to have been given a distraction. Lucien looks at Veya. Not past her. Not around. At. The word he is not saying sits between them like a weapon they could decide not to use because both of them understand that weapons sometimes use the hand instead. Every room, Veya says, reminding herself as much as him. He nods once. Stay behind the salt. Then he adds, so quiet the stones will have to testify if anyone tries to deny it later. Or don tea, if you'd rather stand with me. The hall becomes a throat-swallowing orders. Miren stands, wiping salt on her skirt with annoyance a lesser woman would waste on fear. Sable tucks the record under his arm like he has decided his pages are worth dying for, and is disgusted with himself for the melodrama. The harbor woman loops her rosary around her wrist and bares her teeth at the idea of ink as a threat. Veya looks at the bowl. The counterfeit coin sulks. The salt line is mended, but one bead is thinner than Prudence would like. The door that locks from the inside is 4 corridors away and already irrelevant. She turns to the king. He is not asking. He is offering. She steps across the salt. The heat at her wrist flares. Not hurting, heralding. And the hall of witness lets out a breath it did not know it was holding, as if a door it had not trusted itself to be opens from the inside. Veya, Lucien says, and it sounds like a warning until she hears the end of it, which is not warning but wonder. The southern bells crash again. The hall doors shake. The counterfeit coin gives one last hungry little hum, as if it can smell a new kind of consent and would like to chew on it. Veya squares her shoulders, finds the steady drum of her choosing under the noise, and meets the coming trouble with the simplest word she has owned all day. Together. The latch on the great door slams upward. Steel, steps, voices, paper. And the first man through the doors is not a soldier at all, but a clerk in good wool. His mouth prim with righteousness and fear, ink-smeared hands clutching a writ like a cudgel. He lifts it and shouts the kind of sentence men use when they want to make the whole world a courtroom. "By the authority of the Guild of Contracts," he cries, "we seize the Omega Thorn under the derivative claim of—" He doesn't finish. Because something moves above them, quick, silent, wrong. A shadow unseats itself from the beams and drops toward Veya's back, with a glint not of steel but of polished obsidian, a knife that drinks light and law alike. Lucien is too far. Miren is too slow. The captain is turned toward the south. Veya turns on instinct that isn't at instinct at all, but the math you learn when the world has tried to make you equation instead of answer. She moves to meet it. The knife blooms toward her throat with the intimacy of a bad promise. And the chapter breaks there, like a board under a foot that refuses to be careful, leaving the next step in the air, unspent, waiting. The knife blooms toward her throat, and Veya meets it with the only thing she has time to move. Her name. She doesn't speak it. She thinks it like a fist. Veya Thorn. Her body follows where her name points. Chin tucks. Shoulders twist. She leans into the attack the way you lean into a wind you refuse to let take you off your feet, inside the radius where a blade is clumsy. The obsidian skims her collarbone instead of her carotid, hungry and frustrated. Pain cracks white and precise. Heat floods her skin. Her left hand finds the attacker's wrist by the memory of kneading dough. Press, turn, fold, and her right hand finds the heel of his palm and shoves. The angle is wrong for poetry, and perfect for joints. The knife kisses stone with a sound like a sentence cut off. He expects her to stumble back. She steps into him. Hips drive, knee rises, the old language of survival she learned from women in alleys that smell like cabbage and regret. He grunts. Breath leaves him. And then the air leaves Veya, because the man is heavier than he looks, and he does not fall alone. They collide with the floor. The bowl hums behind them like a wasp trapped in glass. Someone shouts. Salt skitters. Boots thud. The assassin recovers with a boneless speed that doesn't belong to people who rest enough. He is already reaching for the knife. Veya slaps her palm on the obsidian first. Cold, not temperature, permission. The blade wants to drink something that isn't to blood, and she can feel it lapping at her palm as if her skin were a saucer. Consent, it begs. Consent. Give me something to bind. Eat salt, Veya snarls, and drags the blade edge first through Miren's fresh ring. Crystals rasp against stone like stubborn bones. The knife hisses, a sound that tastes like ink burning. The assassin recoils as if she scalded him. Veya uses the open to roll, coming up to her knees, and in the turn registers 3 things at once. Lucien crossing the floor with that terrifying gentleness turned into speed. The captain, S shield catching a clerk. S writ, and folding it like paper that has learned humility. And Oren leaning on the gallery rail, amused as if he set this table and is delighted to see who reaches for which dish. The assassin flicks his fingers. The knife hops. It wants to go home. Veya's palm refuses to release. She curls her fingers until obsidian is trapped against lifeline and salt. No, she says to a piece of rock like it is a person she refuses to feed. Lucien arrives not like a storm, but like a promise kept. He does not shout her name this time. He doesn't touch her either. His hand lands on the assassin's shoulder, and something in his voice turns river steel. Down. The man goes down. It is not a question of weight or skill. The word itself seems to have been waiting in the room for a man with crown blood to give it permission to do what it wants. The assassin hits stone, wind gone, hands empty, eyes wild. Not dead, Veya says, because she remains herself even now, and the doctrine she invented refuses to make her cruel. Not yet, not yet, Lucien agrees, and in the corner of her eye she sees the captain binding the man with a neat economy that suggests he ties his boots the same way, efficiently with opinion. Sable hovers at the edge of the salt as if it has teeth and he respects them. Miren is already kneeling again, mending the places where the ring scuffed when Veya and the assassin rolled. The counterfeit coin hums, annoyed at being upstaged. The cloth over the bowl pulses as if it dreams of breathing. "Seize her," a clerk at the door cries, voice cracked with righteousness that has never worked a double shift. By the guild's writ, "You brought ink to a kitchen," the harbor woman snaps, and slaps the man across the face with her rosary of salt beads so hard a small cloud bursts, and the clerk sneezes himself into a new opinion. Oren claps once, delighted. "Ah," he purrs. "She learns fast." "She was born fast," Miren says without looking up. "You just arrived late." Veya's palm throbs. The obsidian is trying new tricks, whispering her own sentences back at her in a voice so close to hers she has to bite down to hear the difference. Consent is a door. Consent is a door. Consent is mine. She tells it evenly, and presses the knife harder into the salt until the whisper thins to a sulk. The hall shrinks and expands around the sound of approaching boots, the kind that know how to be many without tripping themselves. Palace guard. Real soldiers, not men who borrowed authority from paper. They pour in, see the salt, see the king, see the counterfeit, and become quiet in the way disciplined men become quiet before complicated work. "South wall?" Lucien asks the captain, without taking his eyes off Veya's bleeding collarbone. "Held," the captain replies, jaw tight. "For now. They wanted the hall. They wanted..." His glance flicks toward the bowl. "That. They can want," Miren says. "Wanting doesn't make doors open." Lucien's gaze returns to Veya. For one heartbeat, everything else in the room is furniture. "You're hurt." "It wanted more than blood," she says, looking at the obsidian. "It wanted to drink my word." She releases the knife into the salt, careful, elegiac, as if laying down a wicked child who just needs a nap. "It won't. Not here." Something like wonder crosses his face, small, quick, dangerous, because it wants to be bigger. He swallows it. "Dera warned you?" Veya blinks. "You know her name." "I try to know the names of people who keep me alive," he says, dry as bread ends. "She found me before she found you." "Of course she did. Scullery women know which mouths are for show and which are for use." Sable clears his throat with the zeal of a man who would rather read than bleed. "Majesty, the guild has violated the hall. We can petition the river court to revoke their charter." "The river court sleeps except when it's being paid to dream," Miren says. "By morning they'll have a parable about why this was necessary." "Then we don't wait for morning," Veya says, surprising herself with how calm the idea feels in her mouth. She has spent her life waiting for better rooms to be built by men who never intended to hammer a nail. "And we go to the place that wrote the first coin, and we make it say my doctrine," Sable sputters into his inkwell. You want to amend the sanction at its source? I want to tell the oldest room a new word, Veya answers, palm throbbing, collarbone burning, name steady. She looks at Lucien. Where is it? He knows exactly what she means. The root charter is held in the scriptorium vault, below the river intake, under lock and oath, where men who love locks have already made copies of their own keys, Miren says grimly. Then we bring what they don't have, Veya says. Salt, bread, witness with teeth. She looks to the harbor woman, to Sable, to the captain, to Miren. And doors that lock from the inside. Lucien's mouth moves the way it moved when she said together. We go now, he says, before the guild remembers that corners are rooms. He turns and pauses. His fingers hover uselessly for a second that betrays how tired he is of not touching her. Will you walk? I'll walk, Veya says, and on the word her body remembers its weight, and the pain in her shoulder checks in to see if it is invited to ride along. It is. She will not deny what is hers. They leave the hall with the salt ring whole and the counterfeit sulking in its bowl, covered again with the cloth that smells like rain when rain gets talked out of falling. The assassin is dragged away, conscious now, eyes unfocused, lips moving around the taste of a word he tried to swallow and couldn't. Oren is gone, which is what men like Oren do when people start asking for receipts. The corridor to the scriptorium has bad manners. It narrows where it should widen, and widens where it should pinch. The sconces burn just bright enough to make the shadows feel deliberate. Veya notes every door, every handle, every seam in stone. Every room, she tells herself as she passes, is mine to name or to refuse. Dera appears like a useful thought. Her apron is damp, and her cheeks are red from steam. This way, she says suspiciously casual, as if she was always going to the scriptorium with a king and a rejected Omega and a green-crest counselor and a harbor woman and a clerk who has begun to realize his pen is sharper than he thought. The stairwell drops into the cooler parts of the palace, places where stone sweats and the river Es voice can be heard, not with ears but with bones. Servants step aside, eyes curious and respectful. The captain splits his men. Some stay to secure the hall. Some follow them down into the part of the palace that remembers why it was built. The scriptorium doors are plain oak, banded in iron that remembers hands. 2 scribes stand guard with the kind of dignity people grow when they spend their lives making sure other people's words survive fire, flood, and fashion. They see the bowl salt on Miren's hands, the cut on Veya's collarbone, the set of Lucien's mouth, and open without asking the question they want to ask because the answer is already in the room. Inside smells of ink and vellum, and the old sweet of boiled glue. Long tables, slanted stands, windows along the riverside where lantern light pretends to be sunlight for tired eyes. In the far corner, a grill of iron bars veils the vault door, river cold, river black, carved with the sigil of tower and water, and something beneath that looks like root. Sable's hands start to shake with professional excitement despite the blood humming through the stones. I have only seen the plates once, he whispers. When I was apprenticed. The root charter plates are not a church, Miren says. Don't kneel to them. Use them. The vault recognizes Lucien's palm, his voice, a shard of iron in his pocket that was cut from the first bar hammered for the palace gate. Locks lift with the tired courtesy of old servants. The door opens, and the river breathes out, cool and sure. Inside, the plates rest in their frames like teeth in a skull. Copper, iron, silver, an alloy Sable refuses to name, because names have power, and he likes his bones inside his body. Each bears the sigil in some early, purer form, and around the device the words that are supposed to govern what coins can claim and what they can't. Veya steps close, and the skin of her wrist warms. The plates are older than her name, and do not care about her until she breathes. Then they do. Metal turns its attention like a wolf turning its head. quiet, interested, deciding if eating you serves the story. "Find the clause," she says to Sable, "the one about guardianship conversion." He is already scanning with the raptor focus of a man who prefers letters to faces. "Here," he says, finger hovering over the alloy plate. "Eligible sovereign, unbonded, unclaimed omega, consent spoken, conversion to claim." His voice flattens into disgust. A tidy piece of misogyny masquerading as protection. "Add mine," Veya says. "Every room." "You cannot simply add doctrine to a plate," Sable protests, scandalized because part of him is a guildman, whether he likes it or not. "It must be enacted by—" "Witness with teeth," Miren interrupts, lifting the hard tin of salt she borrowed from Veya's room. "Bread and water," she looks at Lucien. "And a crown that is willing to get on its knees." Lucien doesn't flinch. He looks at Veya. "Do you want this?" She does not pretend she is not afraid. She does not pretend she knows what will happen if the metal doesn't like being corrected by a girl who smells of kitchens and alley law. She thinks of ropes and contracts and knives that wanted to drink her word, and of how good the bread tasted when she ate it in the street like a person. "Yes," she says. "Then we write it," Lucien answers, and his voice is softer than his jaw, which means he is more dangerous than he looks when he says please. They set the plate on a table that remembers other disrespectful miracles. Sable brings a stylus, the kind used for rubbing out mistakes on wax drafts. His hands are careful, trembling only when they hover at the edge of what he was taught not to do. Miren sprinkles a rim of salt around the plate and sets the iron bowl beside it. Dera appears with water, because of course she does. Bread, because she knows it isn't sacred unless someone eats. The harbor woman mutters a prayer in a dialect Veya has only heard in the fish market at dawn, when even deities accept payment in the form of good work. "Speak it," Miren prompts, "so the plate hears you, and the river carries your voice into its memory." Veya rests her fingers on the cold edge. Her cut stings in a clean way. "Consent is mine," she says. "In the first room and the last. In halls and kitchens. In beds and markets. Consent cannot be borrowed, traded, bought, or bled out of a body. If consent is given in one room, it must be asked for again in the next." She inhales. Bread and ink. River and iron. If a sovereign would convert guardianship to claim, the Omega's consent rules every room after, or there is no claim. The plate hums. Metal doesn't like new words. It likes to dream of the hands that made it aid, and pretend those hands never did harm. The hum rises into a keen. The salt smokes like winter breath. Sable leans in despite himself, stylus poised like a man about to scratch his own law into a god's face. "Now," Miren says. Sable writes. Not letters. Lines that are letters if you've lived long enough in rooms where letters are secrets you can chew when there is no bread. He cuts the doctrine into the space under the clause that pretended to be tidy. The stylus bites soft metal. The river in the walls deepens, listening like an old judge who finally met a plaintiff who refuses to cry in his chambers. A crack runs through the plate. "Stop," Sable gasps, horrified. "Keep going," Veya says evenly, "because fear is not the god here. She is." The crack bridges the old words and her new ones. The hum steadies. The counterfeit in the bowl upstairs hums also, as if a string under the palace vibrates in sympathy and in warning. Miren pours water into the iron bowl and breaks bread into it. Salt follows. The scriptorium fills with the smell of a kitchen that doesn't apologize for the holy things it does. "Witness with teeth," the harbor woman says, and tears a chunk of bread for herself and for Veya and for Lucien who eats, because he has learned in one long day that refusing food is sometimes refusing to be human. Dera looks at Veya with eyes that have scrubbed too many pots and learned to be kind anyway. "Now say it like you mean it," she says. "I consent when I consent," Veya says, throat tight. "And I revoke when I revoke." She places her cut palm to the plate, On the new lines Sable carved. Pain flares, clean as a bell. Blood dots metal like punctuation. Every room. The plate swallows the blood with a shiver. Something howls in the vault. Not animal. Law. The old clause tries once to be louder and fails because the river has decided it prefers new stories today. The crack glows like a thread pulled through cloth by a needle in the dark. Sable sobs once because he is a religious man and did not know it until now. It took, he whispers. Saints keep us. It took. Saints had nothing to do with it, Miren says, wiping Veya's palm with a strip of linen that used to be an apron until it was promoted to bandage. Women with rooms did. The floor trembles like something heavy just stopped pretending it wasn't moving. Above them, the palace bells swing on their own once, twice, like a sigh. And then the scriptorium door blows in. Not from force, no battering ram, no charge, from ink. A sheet of writ slides under the door like a snake and peels itself open with a sound like a page turning in a library no one dusted. Lines crawl across its surface as if written by a hand too fast to see. The words climb the wood of the door, black veins searching for a heart. Salt, Miren barks. Already, Dera says, flinging a palmful across the threshold. The ink recoils, hissing like a cat. The Guild of Contracts has decided to stop sending men and to send the thing it worships. A second writ slides in, this one headed with the sigil of the tower and river. Almost right, wrong by the hair's width that tastes like rot. The counterfeit charter unfurls and aims itself at Veya's ankles, like shackles discovering they can be spider silk when they want to be pretty. Veya steps back. The plate behind her hums approval for the first time in its metal life. It can smell me, she says, breath even. It wants my door. Lucien steps between her and the ink. Not because she asked, but because earlier she asked him to stand between her and anyone who tried to claim her by force, and a man who has been waiting his whole life to be told what to do in a useful way will follow a sentence like a star. Ink crawls up his boot. He does not kick. He says no. The ink stutters as if offended to be addressed like a misbehaving child. Name it, Miren says. Name what it is wrong about. It thinks paper is a room, Veya says, the answer arriving like heat along bone. It thinks my signature is a key I put down and forgot. It thinks I can be bound by a sentence I didn't say. She steps forward and addresses the writing like she addresses men who think humor is consent. You are a room I didn't build. You have no door I will use. You don't get my name. The writ hesitates. The counterfeit learns a thing it hates. Language is only law when the mouth that speaks it belongs to a person. It lunges anyway because stubbornness is the only thing old power puts on when it isn't wearing charm. The ink leaps, lace-fine, for Veya's wrist. The bandage Miren tied flares hot. Veya raises her palm, the one that touched salt and plate, and slaps the writ. Ink meets blood meets doctrine. The writ screams. It doesn't have a mouth. It uses the rooms. The scriptorium tiles shift under their feet. Veya's knees bend. She refuses to fall the way she refused to give the rope her throat. Out, she says to the ink. And then, because she is done making the world gentler than it deserves, get out. It gets out. It peels from the stone and slithers back under the door, offended as a cat cheated of cream. The first writ, sensing the new rules, follows. The men who sent them will be furious when they learn their paper does not like to be told no. Silence blooms. It smells like ink after rain. Sable laughs, wild and delighted and terrified. Doctrine of rooms, he says, tasting the words now like something he intends to write on everything that tries to hold a woman without her word. We'll append it to every charter we print until men think they thought of it. Let them, Miren says. As long as girls don't forget who made it. Lucien's shoulders sag like a gate that has held all day and decides to trust its hinges for one sigh. He looks at Veya. His eyes are not steel or river. They are the color of a promise when it's tired and still chooses to be kept. You good? She thinks about lying to make him feel better and refuses. No, she says honestly, but I'm standing. Good, he says, and the word means thank you. The captain appears in the doorway, blood on his sleeve, not all of it his. He scans the room, counts the heads he considers his, registers the plate on the table, the salt rim, the bandage on Veya's wrist, and the absence of Oren like an itch. They've pulled back, he reports. South wall holds. The hall is ours. The city is muttering and lighting candles and pretending it isn't choosing sides. They'll choose in the kitchens first, Dera says. Then the docks. Then the rich will decide the city has an opinion. Then we feed the kitchens, Veya says, surprising herself with how obvious the plan is once it arrives. We take bread and salt to the market at dawn and read the doctrine out loud for anyone with ears. We don't wait for halls. We go to rooms. Lucien looks at Sable. Print? Print, Sable pants, already halfway to ecstatic collapse. Broadsides, slips, in the canteens, in the soap wrapping, on the back of receipts, in the city notices about trash pickup, everywhere. Greencrest will stand at your shoulder, Miren says to Veya, not because we are generous, because we are proud. The river under the floor hums in approval or hunger. It is hard to tell the difference in rivers. The plate cools. Doctrine shifts from new to inevitable in the slow way stone accepts that it has been carved. They leave the scriptorium carrying nothing that looks like a weapon and everything that ever been called one. Above, the palace has settled into that taut, quiet cities learn after a fight when the people who live there decide whether to wake tomorrow as neighbors or enemies. The night is late now. Not a time skip, simply the natural creep of hours spent surviving. Veya's room is the same size it was when she measured it with her eyes the first time. It feels bigger because her name fits inside it without stooping. Lucien stands in the threshold again, as if the stone remembered where his boots were supposed to stop. Dera appears long enough to set down a tray of soup and a heel of bread, and then disappears as if she has 100 other trays and a city's worth of doors to deliver to. Eat, Lucien says, and then adds, with apology he doesn't try to hide. I'll be near. Outside, Veya says, not unkind. Every room. He nods, satisfied to be useful. Every room. He leaves the door open a hand's width, until her hand reaches past the latch and closes it. The click is not a dismissal. It is a promise that she will open it again when she decides to. She sits on the edge of the bed and eats soup that tastes like someone stood at a stove and believed she would live long enough to be hungry again. Her collarbone has begun to throb in that dumb, faithful way wounds do when danger recedes enough for bodies to remember what pain is for. Her wrist itches under the linen. She doesn't scratch. She does not sleep. When the knock comes, the rhythm Dera used earlier, she expects a whisper. The voice is a man's, polite. Wrong. Omega Thorn, it says through the inner door. A message. She does not go closer. From whom? Oren, the voice says, and Veya almost laughs, because of course Oren has couriers. He says the guild would like to negotiate. Tell him we negotiated in the scriptorium, Veya says. The river agreed with me. A pause. The voice softens as if it thinks softness is a key. He says he can end this without more blood. He says all he needs is a small proof. A second consent written in your hand. To confirm the first. Clerk's habit, he says. Veya looks at her door. The old fear stirs out of habit. The new doctrine answers it, and the fear sits back down. Tell him he can have my answer at dawn in the market, with bread and salt and witnesses who bite. Silence. The messenger's steps retreat. Veya lies back on the bed and stares at the ceiling, because ceilings are a kind of room also, and hers needs to learn that she will look at it as long as she likes. She must have slept because she wakes to bells and light that is not light. It is that particular gray that belongs to kitchens before dawn. She dresses in a clean shift and a staff tunic that fits like a confession. She binds her wrist fresh. She discovers she can raise her arm to comb her hair without crying. She decides to be proud of that instead of angry she has to be. The corridor outside her door smells like bread. It is not a metaphor. The palace is already baking. Dera appears with a basket big enough to be funny on a woman her size. Behind her, the harbor woman rolls a barrel of salt with her hip and curses sweetly in words that make sailors blush and saints lean forward to learn new grammar. "Ready?" Lucien asks, and it is not a command. "Ready," Veya says, and it is not bravado. They take the herb gate because cities prefer to hear news that smells like rosemary. The path spills them into the market that has not yet finished being tense, because traders are not fools. They know where bread will be. People are already gathered because word ran while Veya slept. Women with flour on their hands, men with ropes around their waists, children who have learned to be quiet when rooms are being made. Miren stands on a crate because dignity is taller when it needs to be. Sable has broadsides ink wet under his arm, the words still shining. Every room. He has already given a handful to a girl with blackened fingernails and a grin that says she intends to paste them over anything that doesn't move. Veya steps up on the crate beside Miren not because she wants to be taller, but because sometimes a room needs your height to find its shape. Dera passes her a loaf. It is imperfect in exactly the way bread needs to be to taste like a person made it. Veya holds up the loaf. "Bread and salt," she says, and her voice is not loud, but the market hushes because markets are places where listening is a trade. Witness with teeth. She breaks the loaf. She dips it in salt. She eats. She hands to Miren. Miren eats. She hands to Lucien and learns what a city does when it sees a king take bread from a woman's hand without decoration. It quiets into something like respect that might become love if fed daily. "Consent is mine," Veya says into the morning that is not yet allowed to be morning, because the bells have not finished telling it what to do. "In this room and the next and the next. If I say yes in one room, you will ask me again in the next." She looks at the harbor woman. "Say it with me." The woman grins and belts the words as if they are a sea shanty. "Every room!" The market laughs itself brave. "Every room!" Sable begins handing out slips like a man scattering seed with a gentleness he didn't know he had. Dera picks up a handful and disappears because she intends to paste them in places men done TC until it is too late. Oren arrives only when he can be sure there will be a crowd. He dresses like a man who wants to be mistaken for a poem, and fails because poems done to smell like expensive oil. 2 guild clerks trail him with faces that have forgotten how to be other things. "Pretty doctrine," Oren says pleasantly, as if complimenting a child who has drawn a convincing horse. "You teach fast." Veya does not smile. "I learned fast because men were slow." He inclines his head. "Then indulge me in a small exercise for the crowd." He lifts both hands. Empty. "Guardianship conversion is a relic. Fine, you have replaced it. Fine. But what is a king who buys labor? A master by another name? What is an omega who steps into his house? A slave who has been told she is safe because the collars are silk." He turns so the crowd can see his mouth forming the words he intends to steal. "Do you see? Consent is a door, yes, but the house is his." The crowd begins that low, worrying murmur that markets use when hunger fights with memory. Veya feels it in her chest like a miscounted beat. Miren's chin tips. She is ready to swing with words. Lucien's jaw tightens. He does not interrupt because he knows rooms need to answer for themselves if they are to stand when he isn't at tea there. Veya lifts her bread. "Whose house?" she asks Oren, as if they are alone and she isn't feeding a city. Name it. The palace, he says, smiling because he thinks the word is his to dish. Veya sets the loaf on the crate between them as if it is a line on the floor. Who scrubs the stones? She asks. Who tends the fires? Who brings the water up 3 flights when the pipes sulk? Who knows how long Rosemary takes to get uppity and how to cut her back without killing her? Whose hands keep the house a house? Dera laughs aloud from somewhere that makes her sound like a ghost men should be afraid of. Us, she says. Us, the market answers, pleased to be reminded of something it already knew. Veya looks at Oren again. If a house is only a roof, then perhaps it is his. But a house with rooms is ours. And every room has a door that locks from the inside. She spreads her hands. Doctrine. Doctrine, the market answers. Oren's smile thins. Charming, he says, which is how men say threatened without needing to confess it. He flicks his fingers. Ink slides out from under his cuffs like a pet. It hits the cobbles and splits into 3 slips, each with letters that don't sit right with themselves. The clerks with him go pale with the ecstasy of sacrilege. They are about to witness a thing their oaths forbid just so they can go home and say they saw it. Derivative claim, Oren announces, filed under the feral provision of the old clause. He lifts his voice so everyone can be educated without consent. If an Omega under guardianship declares consent publicly, and if the sovereign is eligible, and if her consent is challenged, the coin may demand a 3rd affirmation, body voice, and... He smiles because he has been waiting to feed the crowd this particular lie. Blood. The market shivers. Blood is a word that makes fools of kitchens. It can make a doctrine look like a daisy if you say it with enough grease. Miren starts to speak. Veya lifts a hand. The harbor woman wraps the rosary once, tight, around her fist. Why? Veya asks Oren, as if polite curiosity can be a wedge. Would you want my blood? So we can be sure you mean it, he says sweetly. So you can't be tricked into a collar by your own mouth. Or by your coin, she says quietly. And the market hears her anyway because markets were made to be whispered into. Oren's eyes flash, small and mean in the way only a pretty man Aries can when a mirror finally shows him his true mouth. Do it, he says, and one of the slips leaps. Lucien moves like a door closing. He is faster than a coin, but not faster than an idea. The ink veers, becomes lace again, reaches for Veya's bandaged wrist like a husband who thinks vows are property. Veya doesn't retreat. She takes the bread Dera baked and tears a piece free. She dips it in the salt that the harbor woman poured into a small chipped bowl. And she presses the bread to her bandage. The salt eats the blood. The bread drinks it. The doctrine that has learned the taste of her body says, no. The ink hits bread. It can't bind food. It recoils, furious in a way only an idea can be when it learns it is not a god. The crowd laughs, rough and delighted and suddenly brave. Oren goes still as a lie that has discovered it will have to work harder. Witness with teeth, Veya says, and takes a bite of the bread that saved her. The market howls with joy, an animal noise that makes the buildings want to lean in to hear. Oren bares his teeth like a man who has never learned how to use them except to smile. He flicks his fingers again. The 2nd slip leaps, aiming higher, for the place under Veya's jaw, where she pressed her chin to save her throat the night before. Lucien catches the edge with 2 fingers, and for the first time since she met him, he bares his own teeth. Not a threat, a promise. Enough. Majesty, Oren says lightly. You can't protect her forever. Lucien looks at Veya. I'm not trying to, he says, and the crowd hears the only sentence that can carry men safely out of the story and into the work. I'm holding the door while she builds the house. The 3rd slip, which Oren had saved for the prettiest trick, unfurls like a ribbon and floats above their heads. It glows faintly, wrong light, the kind that comes from people who think sunlight is a thing you can buy in a bottle. Letters crawl, marriage writ, they say in strokes that pretend not to shake. Condition: 3 affirmations by moonrise. Failure: Omega returns to council custody. The market groans. Men who had begun to be proud decide to be frightened instead. Women who were already tired consider being more so. Miren steps forward, voice low and dangerous. "You will not." "It's the law," Oren says, almost pious. "You've made such a show of liking it today." Veya stares at the writ. Moonrise. The moon is still a rumor in the gray sky, but the day will not wait forever. 3 affirmations, she says, and then laughs once because the number tries to be magic and fails because she didn't choose it. "You want my body, my voice, and my blood." "The city wants to be sure its king isn't a thief," Oren says smug. "The city wants to be sure its Omega isn't foolish. The city," the harbor woman growls, "wants him to shut his pretty mouth." Lucien's attention touches Veya and waits to be invited. She lets it in. "We don't dance for him," she says softly. "We don't give him a show he can sell." "What do we give him?" Lucien asks. "Work," Veya says. "Bread to the kitchens, salt on the thresholds, paper on the walls." She looks at the writ again and decides on the shape of her next room. "And 1 affirmation that is none of his business and all of mine." Oren's eyes narrow. "Which?" Veya lifts her chin. "The door." She looks at Lucien. "At moonrise, at the herb gate, the door that locks from the inside. If the city needs a show, it can watch me decide whether to open it." She turns back to Oren. "That's what you want, isn't it? To sell tickets to a woman making a choice?" He smiles, slow and hungry. "Oh, Thorn, you're a better showman than I am." "Bring your slips," she says. "Bring your clerks. Bring your pretty words that think they can be rooms. I'll bring a key." She looks down at her hand, because sometimes prophecy is just naming what you already hold. Bread, salt, bandage, skin. Oren bows as if the crate were a stage and he owns it. "Moonrise," he says. He backs away because he knows better than to turn his back on a market that has just learned a new way to make noise. He is 2 stalls away when someone screams. It isn't fear. It's the way air sounds when it leaves a body too fast. Veya spins. The assassin from the hall, freed or clever, stands at the edge of the crowd with a girl clutched to his chest, knife at her throat. She is younger than Veya by too little to be safe, eyes huge, hands inked with the blue that will not wash out of skin when you work paper for a living. He doesn't want her. He wants the room. "Omega Thorn," he calls hoarsely. "Consent to come to me or I cut." The market stills into that fragile thing that can become either violence or quiet, depending on who speaks next. Veya feels Lucien's body shift beside her, not stepping down, coiling. Miren does not move at all. Her hand hovers over the salt on the crate. The harbor woman's rosary clicks once, decisive. Veya steps off the crate. The crowd ripples the way grass does when a wind invents a path. She stops 2 lengths away, hands open. "What's your name?" she asks the girl. The girl's throat works against the blade. "Liss," she squeaks. "Liss, miss." "Liss," Veya says. "Look at me." The assassin digs the knife. Lice hisses. She looks anyway because there are some faces a body prefers to look at when the choices become small. "We don't do that here," Veya tells the man softly. "We don't use someone else's throat to make our room." "Consent," he snarls. "Now." "No," Veya says. "Not cruel, not brave, true. I won't walk into a room you own, but I'll make one you can't control." He blinks, confused because he has never been asked to consider that his wrists have doors too. His grip loosens a fraction. It's enough. Lucien moves in a straight line that ruins poetry. The harbor woman's beads fly like hail. Miren's salt arcs like winter. Veya lunges and takes Lise by the forearms the way women have been taking other women by the forearms since the first time men sharpened stone and lied about why. The knife slices Veya's bandage. Blood, small and surprised, blooms. And then the three of them are on the cobbles, breath and tears and salt and laughter all at once, because the body does not separate them during survival. The assassin tries to run. He hits a wall that is the captain. The wall does not move. Lise clings and sobs and apologizes for spilling ink on Veya's sleeve. "It won't come out," she wails. "Good," Veya says, pulling the girl into the kind of hug that corrects years of grammar. "Let it stain." When the market quiets again, Lucien is already walking back to the crate with that gentleness she is beginning to believe is the hardest thing he does. He doesn't raise his hands. He doesn't raise his voice. "Moonrise," he says, and the city hears it as a time and as a place and as a test it would like to pass. Veya stands on the crate again and tastes iron and bread and fear and something that might be joy if it fed. She does not look at Lucien because doors are chosen, not begged for. She looks at the herb gate in her mind, at the lock that is her hand. "Come," she tells the market, "if you want to watch a doctrine become a door." The crowd disperses in 1,000 tasks. Dera picks up her basket and declares she will tell all the girls with blue-stained hands to stand where they can see. Sable runs toward his presses with a face that looks like a man about to propose to a stack of paper. Miren goes hunting for men whose boots look like they step on salt out of spite. Veya climbs down. Pain sparks her collarbone. She breathes through it the way bread breathes when it rises. Slow, stubborn, full of heat it didn't ask for and refuses to be afraid of. Lucien's hand hovers and doesn't land. "Every room," he says again, not as a question this time. "Every room," she says back, and the promise sits between them like a table everyone in the city is invited to eat at. Dusk walks the day toward the herb gate. By the time the moon clears the roof lines, the herb yard is full. Palace staff, market women, sailors who swear they were coming for rosemary and came for something else. The gate's iron vines glint. The river hums. Oren is already there, of course he is, standing where he thinks the light is most flattering, slips tucked smug in his sleeve. He looks bored in the way predators look bored when they have had too many easy meals. Miren stands with the counselors who remembered their spines. Sable has a sheaf of broadsides tucked under one arm and a pen behind one ear like a dagger. The captain's men dot the yard, hands easy on hilts that will only jump if they must. Dera has a line of kitchen girls like a rope between trouble and a story. Veya steps to the gate. She puts her palm on the iron leaves. The lock is not magic, and it is. It is a question. "Body," Oren says, as if it is his right to ask. "Voice, blood." He lets the words sit on his tongue like he intends to spit them into the dirt and claim the stain as his. Veya ignores him. She looks at Lucien. "You asked me earlier if I wanted to stand before witnesses now or later," she says. "I said now." She turns so the city can hear her. "Now." She lifts her voice without shouting, because the night prefers dignity. "Body," she says, and puts her palm to the lock. "This is mine." She turns the key from the inside. The gate opens a hand's width, the width of a promise. "Voice," she says, and looks at Oren so he can read the word in her mouth and know it will never be his. "No," she tells him. "You do not get to ask for my blood." The market hums behind her, a living thing that has decided to be a chorus. "Blood," Oren insists, triumphant because he has learned nothing and expects to be rewarded for it. Or the writ holds. He flicks a slip into the air. It hovers like a moth that eats prayers. Veya breathes. The cut at her wrist has bled through the linen in a small, honest circle. She lifts the bread she carried from kitchen to courtyard. She breaks the crust. She presses the soft warm inside against the bandage, slow, deliberate. The bread takes her blood like a thing that was always meant to keep it safe. She holds the bread up so the city can see. So old laws can watch themselves being washed. My blood belongs to my work, she says, not your writ. The slip quivers. It begins to blacken around the edges like paper held too close to a candle it thought was a friend. The letters crawl and curl. The word marriage gives up first, embarrassed. The word right tries to pretend it was never there. Oren's smile doesn't crack. Men like him lacquer them too well for weather. But his eyes go small. You can't keep doing this, he says softly. You can't keep turning our rooms into your doors. Watch me, Veya says. Behind her, Lucien laughs once, bright and raw, as if someone just set down a weight he didn't know he was holding, and he is not ashamed to sound relieved in front of his own city. He steps forward to the edge of the gate but does not cross because consent is a geography he has begun to map with patience. Then say it, Oren snaps, angry now that the show isn't his. Say the word and bind yourself to him so I can at least sell the tickets. Veya looks at Lucien and discovers she is not afraid of seeing him when she isn't afraid. He looks like a man who would like to be invited into a room and will not push his way in even if the rain comes. She opens the gate. The herb yard holds its breath. The city leans. Veya steps back. The cliff finds her. It is not a drop. It is a stop. It is the moment before the door opens all the way or closes in a man's face. She says, "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story." This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Veya inhales and lets the night stand still for her, not for him. I decide, she says, the words landing one by one in the herb yard like stones across a creek she intends to cross. Body, voice, and what you called blood. Not yours to demand, mine to offer. The gate is open a hand's width. She keeps it there. A woman who has been told all her life to hurry takes her time on purpose. Oren's grin tries to be patient and fails. Then give the city the third sign. His gaze hovers at her wrist like a fly that has learned how to read. Veya lifts the bread and the salt. The bandage has gone pink at the seam. She presses crumb to linen again. Slow, visible. The bread drinks and is sacred by accident and design. All her life she has been told to be clean. Tonight she is not, and that is the holiness. The writ above the yard cracks down its middle, the ink squirming like a snake that doesn't like being watched by the thing it wanted to bite. Letters collapse into lines, then into nothing. The word right collapses last, as if embarrassed to have believed such a small sound could be stronger than a mouth with purpose. Murmurs lick across the yard and fold back on themselves into silence when Veya lifts her hand. Voice, she says, and looks at Lucien because his mouth is a question, not a net. I consent, if and only if my consent rules every room after this one. Lucien hears it like a bell rung once direct to his bones. He does not step. He waits, hands loose, the shape of him still gentled from a whole day of not touching what he wanted to save. Oren laughs softly. Lace, he says. Pretty, harmless. Lace holds ships together when the ropes rot, the harbor woman mutters, flexing the rosary till salt beads chime. Watch your mouth. Veya looks past Oren, over him, through him. She takes the hand's width she opened and makes it two. Body, she finishes, and turns the key from the inside. The herb gate opens, not wide, just wide enough for a choice to fit. She steps back, offering the yard without yielding it. Lucien meets her halfway because he understands geography when it's a person. He crosses the threshold when her palm lifts, not before. A hush rides in with him and takes a seat. The city understands something hungry and old just changed its food. Lucien stops with his boots on stone that her hand owns now. His voice belongs to the place beneath the words. He uses it sparingly. Name your room. Veya thinks of the kitchen she grew in, and the corner behind the oven where heat made a cave for crying. She thinks of the rope that tried to teach her heir belonged to a knot. She thinks of the salt circle refusing counterfeit, and of the plate that swallowed her blood and decided to keep it safe. My door, she says, and a table, and paper that takes our words without trying to own them. Done, Lucien says, because sometimes a king's job is to say that and make it true. He lifts his hand to her hand and pauses, because wanting isn't permission. Her fingers meet his as if this were a dance taught by old women who know all the steps. Skin to skin, not claiming, not pledge, not show. Contact that answers the day. We lived. We mean to keep doing it. The yard exhales. A child claps, startled into joy by adults refusing to frighten him for sport. Sable fails to restrain a small, indecorous cheer. Miren chin tips the degree of a woman who allows herself to approve once without developing a habit. Oren tries to look bored and looks young instead. What a darling sermon, he says to the crowd. Now for the law. If the sovereign accepts the doctrine, then he speaks it. Or the coin calls you a liar and takes you both. The counterfeit coin in the covered bowl in the hall hums as if it heard its name among strangers. Down the slope, salt gleams by torchlight, and a cloth the color of rain holds still because Miren told it to. Lucien's gaze does not leave Veya. Every room after this one, he says, and his voice is a thing that will survive being written down. I don't want a house where your word isn't the lock. Oren opens his mouth again because boys who learned the world from mirrors think they are windows. The words don't come. A sound comes instead, duller, older, the city deciding to move in a direction no man thought to chart. Bells, not alarm, not victory. Work bells, deep, certain, the kind bakers hear when dough is ready and boats hear when tide says now. From the river lifts the answer the scriptorium taught it, a hum that warms a plate, then carries on to warm mouths. Veya lets her hand fall. It's done, she says to Oren as if telling him the weather will not obey his calendar today. Go sell your wrist to someone else's story. The assassin who tried twice to cut a room with a knife does not come leaping this time, which is wise and also disappointing to men who prefer clear enemies to clever ones. The guild clerks swallow hard, discovering the air you eat when you've been wrong for a living. The crowd absorbs them with its old art of turning bad ideas into tired men. But power is habit. Habit resents being replaced with choosing. The counterfeit coin refuses to stop humming. Its wrong river and wrong tower itch toward the herb yard as though the palace has been a pipe all along. Stay, Miren says, and the kitchen girls form a salt rope across the path from hall to gate, palms white, forearms steady from a lifetime of stirring pots that would scorch if you blinked at the wrong second. Dera appears, hair escaping her kerchief, breathless with the speed only women are allowed when the work matters. It's shifting, she pants to Veya. It knows the sound of you and wants to learn it the way fire wants grease. Then it can choke, Veya says. She takes the basket of bread into her left arm and offers the right to Lucien. Walk? He takes her arm like a man entering a room that belongs to someone else. They walk together along the herb beds, rosemary leaning in nosy, time imagining itself brave by association. People make room without being told. A corridor opens that isn't a hall and is more powerful. They are halfway to the hall when the stone hums beneath their feet. Hold, the captain murmurs to his men, voice pitched low to soothe the part of a soldier that longs to solve every problem with the correct amount of force. If salt can do it, let salt do it. If truth can, let truth. Truth tries first. The cloth over the bowl rises as if a breath decided to hallucinate lungs. A blackness that is not smoke, but the idea of smoke presses at the edges, looking for a seam in the air. Miren's ring holds. Not perfectly, enough. Veya steps into the hall with her basket and her bandage and her name, ready to be seen by a coin that would prefer to pretend she is a rumor. Here I am, she tells the covered bowl. The counterfeit answers in the only language it knows. It reaches. Not far. Far enough to test whether a door she made for herself can be burglarized by persistence. Sable stands with his back to the ledger desk, eyes bright the way a man get when he realizes he is useful and not just correct. "Do you want me to read it into the record?" he asks. And Veya hears behind the question the shy fervor of a clerk who has learned that paper can hold courage as well as commands. "Read," she says. "But not for it, for the kitchen girls." Sable reads. Not pompous, not defiant. Clear. The way a good recipe is clear when you are tired and the stew refuses to thicken. He speaks the doctrine like someone who intends to teach it to a boy who thinks he will never need it, and to a girl who fears she will, and to himself, because he finally believes he deserves a room with a door. With each clause, the counterfeit sinks a little in its bowl, as if the words weigh more than the metal. When he reaches, "I revoke when I revoke," the cloth sags and the hum becomes a drone, low and hateful, like a hive keeping bees that sting only women. "Salt," Miren says softly. Dera walks the ring again, scattering bright with a hand that knows handfuls can save a city. The hum dies. The bowl steams once like a kettle giving up and sits quiet. The cloth doesn't move. Sable sets the quill in its groove with hands that have learned steadiness from a woman who refused to fall. Oren has come to the threshold because of course he has. He can't help it. He is a moth and hates every candle he loves. "Nothing ends," he says in a voice meant only for Veya that carries anyway. "Today your doctrine is a fashion. Tomorrow a new coin. Next week a—" "Breadline," Veya interrupts, not unkind. "Hungry people turn rules into food. Watch them." She lifts the basket, and the kitchen girls laugh in the quiet way of women who have been tired all day and discover they are happy anyway. Oren's mouth thins, old aristocrat in a young swagger. "Enjoy your little kingdom of doors," he says, backing toward the corridor. "When men are frightened, they always choose walls. Then we will put doors in them," Miren replies without looking up, "and salt under the thresholds." He goes because there is no money to be made in a room that refuses to sell tickets. The city changes by doing what it was already doing and refusing to call it survival anymore. Sable's broadsides go up before breakfast. Dera and her blue-knuckled girls paste Doctrine of Rooms pages on walls that used to sell snake oils and fashion. A blacksmith tapes one over the price list for collars and doesn't a town take it down when a man with ink on his cuffs glowers at him. A midwife tucks another under the pillow of a girl whose mother cries for the wrong reason. A ferryman nails one to the post where men sweet-talk women into rides they didn't ask for. In kitchens, women say, "every room," when they pull a pan from the oven because the words feel good in the mouth. Sailors mutter it into their rope work and discover knots fall out easier when you don't force them. Children turn it into a rhyme they shout at each other across alleys until it's more game than law, which is how law survives kids. The Guild of Contracts tries to answer with ink and discovers ink prefers to be used for bread orders and love notes to boys who smell like smoke. Writs do not slither as easily when rooms have been salted by laughter. The counterfeit coin sulks in its bowl until someone, no one knows who, but everyone will get to take credit, slips it into a sack with 3 fistfuls of salt and the rosary beads and carries it to the river. At the quay wall where fishwives curse like poets, someone says, "Truth wants a ride," and dumps the sack where the river is strongest. The river takes it without ceremony. A bubble rises and pops like a last bad idea. When the sack is found downstream, a week later, snagged on a root, it is full of sludge the color of tired rules. Children poke it with sticks and grow bored. The beads wash clean. The salt is gone into water that belongs to everyone. Northspire doesn't become a paradise. It is not that kind of story. A man still shouts at his wife in the lane, and 3 women appear without looking at each other and stand between them until the shouting has nowhere to go. A boat hand tries to corner a girl in a shed and finds the door shuts itself and one toe open until he agrees to go home. A clerk takes a bribe, and another clerk says his name out loud in the hall of witness, and Sable writes it down like a man sharpening a knife. Old habits do not die. They learn to run. Lucien works like a mule that decided to be beautiful when nobody was looking. He signs the doctrine into law with a hand that no longer shakes at the thought of paper turning into a trap. He angers men who wear clean boots to meetings and smiles at them until they are off balance because they thought they knew which king they had bought. He forgets to sleep until Veya raps her knuckles on a door and says, "Every room includes your bed," and he laughs and loses the argument on purpose. Miren does not smile more often. She does not need to. She trains 3 new counselors to gnaw through writs like rats through bad rope. The harbor woman finds work for boys who would have been hired as thugs and turns them into men who load salt onto carts without spilling. Dera takes her scullery wages and buys a book. She writes her name in the front, and then writes it again because she can. Lise learns to set type. The black under her fingernails refuses to leave, stubborn as law, and she is glad. Oren is not seen for a while, and then is, at the edge of a crowd, hat pulled low, mouth remembering how to be handsome without being convincing. He watches like a man who suspects he missed a ship he thought would sink before it sailed, and does not yet understand that ships can be built with lace. There is still the matter of choosing. Day after day, Veya works in rooms that used to treat her like someone else's idea. She learns the names of door hinges. She eats with the staff at a table that fits because she made it. She allows herself to discover what her laugh sounds like when she is not braced for the hand on the back of her neck. Lucien does not ask again the way men ask when they want to turn patience into pressure. He asks differently. "Walk?" he says at odd hours that make sense to 2 people who work inside clocks. "Bread?" Or, when both of them are too tired for sentences, "Door?" And he stands outside hers, not pushing, not performing, as if ready to be the wall she chose instead of the wall she was given. Sometimes she opens the lock without opening the door, and stands behind the wood, listening to his breathing until hers learns steadier habits. On a night, the river feels like it has forgiven the city for being built where it wants to run. Veya opens the door and keeps it open. "Come in," she says. He steps across the threshold, like a man stepping onto a boat he trusts, because he trusts the woman who built it. He doesn't reach for her. He looks at the table, at the clean bed, at the window where Rosemary is arguing with time under a moon that minds its own business. "Every room," he says softly, running his fingers along the inside of the door where a hand leaves oil that only carpenters and lovers pay attention to. "Every room," she says, and hears the truth of it dent her old fear like a knee in a door that deserved it. They sit at her table. She tears bread. He pours water. They do not pretend food isn't covenant. When his fingers brush a crumb from her knuckles, she leaves her hand where it is long enough to say yes, then moves it away to show the yes has a map. "Do you want the claim?" he asks, because the city is happy to assume and he refuses to let it. His voice is not shy. It is careful in the way a man becomes careful when he has broken something once and intends never to do it again. "I want the doctrine obeyed," she says. And then, because truth should get to eat too. "And I want you." He looks down as if being seen takes practice when you're wearing a crown. Then up. He places his palm on the table between them, then will make it law in the only way law works. In a room, with witnesses that have teeth. "Dera," Veya calls through the inner door, because Dera has better ears than saints. "I'm already here," Dera says cheerfully from the passage, and appears with the harbor woman behind her, and Miren, like a storm woman, won't apologize for. Sable arrives late and breathless, with a pen he swore he wasn't going to bring, and could not leave behind anyway. "Eat," Veya says. "Bread and salt." They do. The words taste different when friends are the kind that could stop you if you present them with a door you do not mean to open. Veya looks at Lucien. He looks back. She speaks so the table remembers her voice if the paper ever forgets. "I consent," she says. "Now, here. Not because the city is watching. Not because a coin is humming. I consent to be claimed by you if every room rules the next by my word and yours. I consent to the bond if it is not a chain. I consent to a marriage if it is not a mask. I consent to share my name with yours if it doesn't swallow mine. Lucien's answer is a hand. Palm up, no ring, no mark, a gesture older than either. I accept, he says, under those terms and under no others. I accept revocation when you revoke. I accept that protection is what I do when asked, and nothing at all when not. I accept that in our house, I am not the roof. I am the man who checks the doors if you're tired and stands watch only when you tell me where. Witness with teeth, Miren says, and bites her bread. The harbor woman grins like a storm she didn't have to spend. Sable's eyes shine as he writes, and if his hand shakes, he calls it reverence instead of fear, and is right. Dera pushes the inner door fully open the way women do when they decided a thing has been decided. Now kiss, she says with the bossy tenderness of someone who wakes bakers before dawn and knows when the dough is ready without looking. Veya laughs because joy is a door too. She leans forward, stops, counts so her body learns patience from her mind. Then bridges the last breath. The kiss is not a performance, and not a promise to be obeyed like a bell. It is two people choosing the same room. When they part, the city is not different. The city is the same, and knows it can be more of itself. Tomorrow, Lucien says against her forehead, and his breath feels like a prayer that refuses to be sad. We write it on the plates again. At the top this time. We cook breakfast first, Veya counters, because she wants him to learn that revolutions do not make bread rise faster, and because love is what you do with the morning when the night didn't lie to you. They do both. By noon the doctrine sits on the root charter like a sentence that wishes it had been born earlier, and by evening women are building doors in houses that never thought they'd need them. Men who want to be good are relieved to be told how. Men who don't learn to sit in rooms by themselves until they do or leave. And there are celebrations that do not look like triumph, and that is the point, meals that last too long. Children allowed to fall asleep on benches because they refuse to miss the speeches. 4 different old women arguing in a corner about whether rosemary or sage makes better conversation. Oren does not come to any of those. He comes later, to the river wall where Veya stands with her basket in the dark, that isn't Ati alone anymore. He wears no mask for once. He looks the way handsome men look when the only audience is the water. You won, he says without malice. No, Veya answers. We learned a thing and dared to live like it. He leans on the stone. They'll make you a saint for this. She laughs properly now. I will burn every candle they light if they try. The doctrine isn't a shrine. It's a doorstop. Oren's smile is real, and therefore smaller. Do you miss the girl who had to move fast to live? She's eating, Veya says, and tucks a piece of bread into the hollow between stones where rats and saints tell secrets. But she's not leaving. She prefers a full table. He tips a finger to his hat, as if to a goddess he might finally consider worshipping, if only because she refuses to ask for it. If you need a man who knows the price of paper, he says, ask. I will, she says. Because doors are wild like that, opening onto rooms that hold chairs for old enemies changed by usefulness. He goes, not cured, but changed by proximity to people who didn't need to beat him to make him learn something. Veya turns to the river and breathes until she can hear her own lungs over the water. Footsteps don't try to sneak. She would hear them anyway. Lucien finds her shoulder with the kind of touch you can say no to. She doesn't. Tomorrow, he says, and she hears the list in his head and sets it down in order with him. Letters to send, kitchens to feed, doors to check, men to disappoint gently, women to promote without apology, salt to buy. Tomorrow, she says, and leans the back of her head against his chest because her body has understood what her mouth has been teaching it. All touch is chosen. He laughs into her hair, soft. You still owe the city a room, he teases. You promised a table. She smiles. I built it yesterday. They've been eating off it all day. They just didn't see. He lets the quiet have them. Above the river, the bells that called work into being and work into ceasing sing once, satisfied. There is no coronation for a woman who made a door and walked through it. There is a market day. Good bread vanishes by mid-morning. A girl with blue hands sets 4 lines of type without thinking because the words have moved into her wrist. A boy says, every room to a boy he wants to kiss, and the second boy says, ask again, and the first does, and they grin, and the city picks that up and carries it a block and then a mile, and then across the water to a place that thinks it doesn't need it and does. Later, when candles burn low and the cradle of the moon tips water into the river, Veya stands at her door and watches the dark. It does not threaten. It invites. Lucien puts his palm against the frame inside. May I come in? Yes, she says, out of habit, hers now, and turns the key a last time, not because she must, but because doing so makes her laugh and keen at once. Every room. Every room, he echoes. And then he stops echoing and begins learning new things to say. The door closes. Not to keep anything out. To hold in what they chose. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.